Okay, now we alluded to this problem earlier. Dirty dozen item number 5 is protecting our children from the various things in life that can come along and make life difficult. I mentioned that 18-year-old example, and I had a client sit across from me at the table about 3 or 4 months ago who had installed a children's protective sub-trust within this living trust we did for them. And the reason he wanted that was he said, I remembered, Jeff, back to when I was a senior in high school. Good friend, spent several years with him going through high school. Straight shooting guy. Tragically, both his parents were killed in an automobile accident. He said, I didn't see my friend for another 3 years. When I ran into him again, he had totally changed because he'd inherited $250,000. His countenance was down. He was unkempt, unclean. He was on drugs. And he had lost job after job, had no family life or social life. And he attributed it largely to A, losing his parents, obviously, but B, being inundated with this large sum of money. We also have to face the grim statistic that 50% of American marriages, unfortunately, wind up in divorce, and that's a very sad thing. But you know, in California, the divorce rate is actually closer to 100%. You know why? It's because the people in Hollywood get married and divorced so many times that overall you've got a rate that's much higher than 50%. Now that's a little tongue-in-cheek, but the statistic is still pretty serious, isn't it? For somebody with 4 or 5 children, you know. What we don't want to have happen, most of my clients, is for the parents to die and leave the money to the child. The child is married. The assets are immediately deposited into the joint checking account or used as a down payment on a home. And before you know it, the divorce looms and crops up. The couple splits, and it's on the table. The inheritance money is on the table. 95% of all divorce cases settle before a full-bore trial, and that money gets split in half, or something like that. Well, where do you think the money goes that goes to the divorcing spouse, not the child, the spouse of that child? Well, they might get remarried, right? And that money's going to get commingled again. Ultimately, your money could wind up in the hands of somebody else's grandchildren, somebody you never had an inkling would come along. And, you know, that is emotionally painful for a lot of people to think about. People also wind up with legal problems. It's a litigious society we live in. And so these are the kind of things that concern people. Here is a basic concept we suggest that people think about if this is an issue for them. Once the second spouse dies, and remember we had this 2-part trust that fed into the family trust. Once the second spouse to die goes, the money's in the family trust. How do we distribute it to the children? Well, it's your choice. But here are the options. You can leave it to them outright. And if your children are mature, very, very stable, and you have a great degree of comfort with them and their money management skills, I have no problem recommending that you leave it to them outright. That's a perfectly legitimate choice. On the other hand, you know, you may be or know somebody like a client of mine by the name of Armand, 83-year-old wonderful individual. Tragically, his daughter is a prostitute, and his son is a long-term alcoholic. Well, they have children. He's got grandchildren. And he came to me and he said, Jeff, I can't leave this money to my son and my daughter. It'll probably wind up hurting them, and there'll be nothing available for my grandchildren who are on the edge as it is financially. So we set up a lifetime trust for those children, which provided an allowance for them during their lifetime, and then for the children, the grandchildren rather, when the children deceased. That's a great solution for a difficult problem. But a lot of you might be saying, well, I'm not real comfortable with that because I don't want to control my children from the grave. I want them to have some responsibility. But yes, it would still be nice to protect their money from divorcing spouses and creditors and scam artists and gold diggers, bankruptcy, lawsuits, that kind of thing. Well, here's a good compromise planning technique that lies somewhere between an outright gift and this permanent lifetime trust. And that is to start your child off in a lifetime trust, but to make them the trustee of their own trust at a certain age. So you might want to have the child be, you might want to have an independent trustee handle the trust funds until the child reaches the age of 35, or whatever age you're comfortable with. Then you can designate the child to either be a co-trustee with the bank, or you can have them be their own trustee, where they really get the checkbook and have access to their own money. And believe it or not, that money will be greatly more asset protected than if you didn't have a trust, even though they're their own trustee. Fast forward to the divorce court situation or the judgment creditor situation. Your child will legitimately be able to say, this is not my money. It's true I'm the trustee, but I'm allowed to pull out as much money as I need to maintain my lifestyle, and then it's going to pass on to my children. It's not technically, legally my money, and it's segregated. Much more asset protection. The reality is, if they want to pull that money out, they're going to be able to find a way to justify it. And they're going to be able to do it because they control the checkbook. So lots of options to consider. And these are the benefits: protection from divorce, from bankruptcy, claims. And if you run with an independent trustee, you know, I've had clients come to me and say, I love my children, but they're artists, they're musicians. They want to experience life. They love Paris, you know. What can we do? The independent corporate trustee is skilled and experienced at doling out enough money to maintain their lifestyle, but not to lavish them with things they don't need. And you can protect them from themselves as a spendthrift.